We back. It's time for some A push, and we're post World War One now, or we're at the end of World War One. And President Wilson, of the United States, comes up with a plan that he thinks will prevent future wars. Right? This was the Great War, and this was supposed to be the war to end all wars. He's very idealistic with his thinking. Wants to spread democracy and free trade around the world. So he's got 14 points, and they're quite sharp. But we're only going to look at what the summary of these points are. We don't have to know them individually. Within this theme of the 14 points, you find something known as peace without victory. You should try to understand what this means here. Peace without victory, right? You have Germany, Austria-Hungary as the main Axis powers, enemies to the Allies during World War One. So Wilson, the war is not fought on U.S. soil. It's fought in Europe. So he comes in with the mindset to convince these countries that are Great Britain and France and that have been run over by Germany to have peace, create peace out of the end of World War One without claiming victory. What does that mean? What does that mean? It means that it doesn't necessarily want them to be punished. Okay, so coming from the U.S. standpoint, only entering the war in 1917, not suffering the same amount of casualties, and not having the destruction to their country, really benefiting. The United States benefited from World War I economically. So peace without victory is his idea. Okay, so what do the 14 points do? They set post-war boundaries. They create new countries. They shrink those countries that are the bad guys, that are the offenders of this war, according to Wilson and the Allies. It creates a code of international conduct, how the world will be shaped in its future and what countries can and can't do to each other. And then his final point, the 14th point, is known as the League of Nations. This will create some sort of international organization that was designed to prevent future catastrophes or future world wars. So we'll look at that in a little bit more detail later. We might as well start off with a little funny stuff. Get it? 14 points, 14 good reasons. Moving on. We're not going to look at these individually, but here they are. If you want to pause it and read them, go for it. Otherwise, I'm fast forwarding through all these points. There's 1, there's 2, there's 3. We got 4, we got 5. Right after 5 is 6, then 7. Yep, then 8. You got it. 9 comes next. Oh, whoop, tricked you. There's 9. Then there's 10. We got 11, 12, 13. Independence for Poland. Then 14. That's the League of Nations. So here's the Treaty of Versailles, or Versailles, for those of you that don't speak French. But the Treaty of Versailles is going to be between these 4 countries that are considered the large, powerful nations that are on the Allied side. Here's the leaders of the 4. You got the big 4, like like the Clippers. They would have the big 4: Lou Williams and Montrezl Harrell and Paul George. But this time it's David Lloyd George and George Clemenceau. And they don't have a Kawhi Leonard, but they do have Vittorio Orlando and Woodrow Wilson. I think he played center, Woodrow Wilson, because he's the tallest. So the other guys must have been the guards and the wings. Anyways, these are the big 4. And they are going to decide what's going to happen within this treaty, which is going to eventually change Europe. So in 1914, the map on the left shows you the countries. You can see the size of Germany, how big it is. You can see the size of Austria-Hungary. Those are the 2 big offenders, according to the Big 4 of World War I. They're the ones that they're claiming responsible. And then you can see Serbia there as well. Then the Ottoman Empire, or Turkey, was the one that joined those as the middle part, the Central Powers, against the Allies. On the right, you got a smaller Germany, you got a smaller Austria-Hungary and split into two, plus the addition of a new country, Czechoslovakia, plus another new country, Yugoslavia. You have a smaller Romania, or sorry, a larger Romania, and then you have the disappearance of Serbia. That gets absorbed into creating Yugoslavia. Plus, you have independence for Poland and all of these other Estonia, Lithuania, other Russian states, bloc states that are up there near the Soviet Union. So the Soviet Union forms as well. You can see that. That replaces Russia and then becomes a communist country. Here's what we need to know about the Treaty of Versailles. Germany gets punished. They take the blame for World War I. Not Austria-Hungary, not Serbia, but Germany. They get the war guilt clause, which leads towards they got to pay back all the damages to Great Britain and France, owing $33 billion in reparations. Not going to be able to pay that right away. They're going to pay it over time. This is what's going to lead towards World War II and towards the rise of Hitler. The other thing that you need to know is there's these new countries. You don't know what they are, but you get these new countries and independence for others. So there's the new country and the independence. And then you get the League of Nations. That is what the big things are about the Treaty of Versailles that you should know. Okay, Germany becomes the country that is punished for the war. They will lose land and resources in the creation of these new countries, and then you get this organization known as the League of Nations. But there's a catch. As the countries agree to the Treaty of Versailles, the United States does not. So here you have a little meme about the Germany taking the Treaty of Versailles, not wanting to. And then Jim Halpert. Austria-Hungary got off pretty easy out of this. So Wilson has to go home, and he has to convince then the Senate to ratify this treaty. And the Constitution, you get 2/3 for ratification of any treaty. There was just Wilson, and nobody else really consulted Wilson within his 14 points and his Treaty of Versailles. So when he got home, he had already lost control of the House and the Senate, which had turned over to Republican, a majority Republican in both houses of Congress in 1918. So if you like memes, I mean, this one's kind of funny. So going against George Washington, right? Entangling alliances. I don't know, is this thing showing up on yours? I don't know how to get rid of it. Let's try this. And does let go away. Keep loading. See that bar down at the bottom? No. Dice. What are we doing here? Wasting time. Come on. Go for it. Nope, not helping. Go back. Exit. And loading. Dr. Pepper. Alright, we're just going to deal with it there. So it says, let's get into an entangling alliance. Haha. Super funny. Irreconcilables. This guy, William Borah, was completely Borah with Wilson's 14 points. So he says, no way, no how, not doing it. Okay, so you automatically get William Borah and 12 of the senators that are opposed to the League and the treaty will not agree to this treaty. Remember, you got to get to 2/3. Okay, so cross off 12 already. Remember them for your quiz and for your test. You should know who these irreconcilables are, and you'll learn more about them when you do the documents. So they wanted to remain isolated from Europe. They are holding to this Washington's neutrality, and which will then the United States will go back to after World War I, because these guys say, no, we don't want the League of Nations. So they refuse to accept the Treaty of Versailles. Then you have the other group that is known as the Reservationists. And this is Henry Cabot Lodge. So he lodged a bunch of complaints about the Treaty of Versailles, and Wilson himself didn't like Wilson. A lot of these guys had some sort of animosity towards Wilson for leaving them out of the negotiations. So again, these guys are open to some sort of compromise negotiations of the Treaty of Versailles, but ultimately they don't vote for it. They wanted to have some control within policy towards other nations. Again, you see this every single time after a war happens. Where does the power shift? Does it stay within the commander-in-chief and the executive branch, or does Congress get it? And there's always this struggle back and forth after a war. Does the executive branch continue to take its liberties and allow for more power to exist there, or does Congress try to fight for it and get it back to keep those checks and balances, I guess? But ultimately, they wrote their 14 reservations, and that was their plan for ending the war. But that doesn't become part of it either. So these are known as the 14 reservations. Well, we can't see that down there. What are we looking at? Why doesn't it? What's the problem here? Oh, no, okay. I already told you that. Congress wants to decide to honor obligations. Alright, then I really like this meme. Made it myself, and I'm super proud of it. So they're reservationists, right? So here's a good pickup line for you if you're looking for it. It says, now this thing's going to mess it up again. I have reservations. Pick you up at 7. Get it? Got it. Good. Alright, we're going to skip this and this, and we'll talk about this. So Wilson goes out to try to convince congressmen and public opinion to persuade the congressmen to vote for this Treaty of Versailles. But he gets sick, and he can't continue to go out on this tour supporting the Treaty of Versailles. Ultimately leads towards a vote, and the Senate does not get 2/3. Therefore, the treaty dies, and it does not exist for the United States. However, it does exist for the rest of the world. They want not necessarily all these terms of the Treaty of Versailles, but the big one becomes the League of Nations. Germany, Austria, Hungary, all the people involved accept the Treaty of Versailles, but the United States will have to sign a separate treaty later with these other countries because they didn't ratify the Treaty of Versailles. This is the League of Nations. You can see that the United States is gray, which means they never became a member. The other countries there, founding members in the dark blue, and then green ones that left that were originally with it. Some joined later. Some were forced to join the League of Nations. Those are the ones in orange. So the United States created this idea of the League of Nations, but never joined it. Later, it'll become the United Nations, which the United States will be a part of, and that'll take place after World War II. Alright, at the end of the war, one more thing that we need to know here is this guy, Alexander Mitchell Palmer. You might see him just as A. Mitchell Palmer. That's commonly known as just A. Mitchell Palmer. But he leads the Red Scare from 1919 to 1921 as the Attorney General. And what this is in response to the Bolshevik Revolution that created the communist state of the Soviet Union, or the USSR. In the United States, you have a bunch of post-war strikes. As the United States was fighting in the war and creating this larger economy, and the government was taking over some of these production plants and paying them and ending the strikes so that there was a continuous line of production to feed the war. Afterwards, these post-war strikes become a problem for production. And there's a bunch of people that had gained power within these unions to lead towards more socialist or anarchist kind of movements. And so the United States government was extremely afraid of this, and they create this Red Scare to try to find who these possible communists were, anarchists were, and get rid of them, get them out of the country. So there was plenty of evidence that would point towards this happening. We don't know how much on how large of a scale it could be, but there was plots discovered to bomb and kill specific businessmen and politicians. So out of this, you get the Palmer raids, therefore named after A. Mitchell Palmer. And what happens is the federal agents and local police will go and make arrests of anybody they identified as a extremist or radical, connecting them to these unions or communist beliefs, people that might be a danger to the United States within its borders. So they determine these radicals as unfit to stay in the United States and kick them out. So down there at the bottom it says that they were deported without due process. They were sent out of the United States because of their possible communist ties. Let me make sure I get everything you need to know there. Boop, 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 boop. Yep, deported without due process. Okay. So here's a little discussion question for you and your neighbors, whoever your neighbors might be. Is this government ideology to protect self-interest and bust labor unions using propaganda, or was there a real threat to national security within the radicals movement through labor unions? Now, to answer this, you might have to dig a little bit deeper. I only gave you some surface information. So, if you're up for that, then go for it. If you're not, then don't do it, I guess. Here's some newspaper about these bombings. These are some political cartoons. The fear of communism becomes alive during this post-World War I era and will continue through the 1980s and 1990s, the rest of the century, basically. So again, you have the connection of labor unions to communism. Just like in the previous era, the labor unions were connected to anti-capitalism movements as well, socialism and anarchy. From this, you will get restrictions on immigration, other things too, but this is one of the contributing factors. We'll talk about that in the 20s. We're worried about production. I like this one right here with the bomb. Immigration restrictions open, therefore undesirables on the little sleeping bag there. Ticking time bomb. Alright, that's it. Get into the documents and have fun. See you next time.